Hey everyone, hope you're having a great day so far. So in a previous video, I talked through the first foundational pillar of the Revival Health platform. It was the overall organizing rationale, which is basically this idea that we were healthy, we made a bunch of changes, we got sick, and if we want to revive ourselves, we need to undo those changes. In today's video, we're going to talk through the second foundational pillar, and this is really an underlying rationale, and this is where most of the science comes in, and it's the following. That the human body, it's this amazing piece of machinery, it's advanced biotechnology. It's also embedded with a deep intrinsic intelligence. It's like an operating system that should be idiot-proof for the user, but, and this is a really big but, it struggles to adapt to rapid changes. And it's that struggle which is making us sick. So if we want to be strong and fit, what we need to do is provide the body with the conditions, the external environment in which it will naturally thrive. All right. So because we get into the science, I want to bring in my collaborator, Nerdy Doug. He's also known as ATP, to step through this in more detail. So ATP, take it away. Thanks, Doug. All right. So just so no one gets confused, all right, it's Clark Kent, right? I got the Clark Kent disguise going on here. I changed the shirt, right? A couple little changes and I become Nerdy Doug or Science Doug. It's all part of the vision, people. Stick with me on this, please. Whatever. So I'm going to step through this foundational concept number 2. And this is basically this idea that we are an evolutionary fish out of water. So let's start with the first component. And this is this idea that our body, it's just absolutely an amazing piece of machinery. It is the most advanced biotechnology that exists on the planet. Much more sophisticated than anything we've come up with. And that's true at the systems level, the cellular level, and the molecular level. But let's just focus at this point, let's just focus on the cellular level, right? So typically when we think of the human cell, well, I mean, what are the images that come to mind? It's like these little red blood cells rushing through the veins. It's like they're on their way to wherever it is they're going, a little cell traffic jam. Or these petri dish images of cells dividing or swimming around. Oh, you know, that's cute, little cute cells. Well, the first thing I want you to do is you need to completely reframe your view of what our cells are. They're actually incredibly complex biotechnology. And the most common analogy that's used is that they are protein factories, okay? And that's pretty, it makes sense because a large part of what they do is indeed produce factories. And if you look at their internal components, you know, they do essentially have what is effectively a control room, that's the nucleus, and they have manufacturing equipment, transport systems, and other things you would expect to find in a factory. And I just want to show you, I mean, so this is where like Nerdy Doug has to be careful because Nerdy Doug thinks this is like mind-blowingly interestingly. I don't know if you guys will, but so some of the technology that's just in each one of our trillions of cells. So let's start with the ribosome, right? So the ribosome, these are these biomolecular machines that print out our proteins. And for me, the analogy is these are essentially 3D printers, except they use a really old technology. So like, for those of you old enough to remember, before there were even floppy disks, there were these cards that you would actually stamp with holes, and that's how we stored data. And that is, within the cell, it's essentially the mRNA are these cards, and they are what program these ribosomes to print out the proteins, which then combine and basically make up our entire bodies, right? So, and there are tens of thousands to millions of these these pieces of machinery in each one of our cells. And I'll just, one more example, otherwise I'm gonna get lost in this, but these kinesin motor proteins, right? So these things basically are used to transport proteins from one place in the cell to another, and the equivalent here are those tractors that push the planes around at the airport. So incredibly complex biotechnology. And just to give you an idea of how efficient this technology is, let me step through this silly example here. So let's start with a super efficient car. So here it is, and we're going to give that car 1 gallon of gas. It'll go about 50 miles. If we do the same thing with a moped, that moped will get 120 miles. Not bad, pretty efficient. But what if we were to give that gallon of gas to a person on a bicycle? Now, of course, we don't drink gas, so we'll give the equivalent in energy, which is a gallon of lard. Who wants some lard? Step right up. But with that gallon of lard, the cyclist will go 1,300 miles, okay? That's 10 to 25 times more efficient. So it's not even really close. I mean, the human body is by far the most, together with the other animals on this planet, the most advanced technology and much more advanced than anything that we've developed so far. And the reality is that we don't understand this technology. So I like to use the example as if it were a UFO or a spaceship that had crashed on Earth. And we spent the last 150 or 200 years poking around trying to figure out what all this advanced technology does and how it works. And we've actually discovered a lot, but I would argue that what we haven't discovered is still much, much larger than what we have discovered. And that's reflected in the scientific research, because every paper you read, it's going to have these types of statements like, the exact mechanism is not clear, further research is needed, it's still not known how, there are multiple hypotheses to explain this, etc., etc. So we don't understand this technology, but we act like we do. You know, particularly with medicine, we love to get in there and tinker around with our pills and our procedures, but often we're tinkering around with things that we don't fully understand. Now, there is someone that does understand all this, and that's Charlie. And who's Charlie? Well, Charlie is this character I came up with for the platform. And basically, Charlie represents the intrinsic intelligence or the embedded technology that is our DNA. And you can think of DNA, essentially, it's a set of genetically coded algorithms that dynamically react to the chemical environment in which our cells find themselves.
What did you say?
Exactly. It's a mouthful, right? So Charlie represents our DNA at work. And the image I like is that of a NASA engineer inside of sort of a massive control room. And Charlie's there, he's monitoring data, he's tracking information, he's making adjustments, playing around with knobs, throwing levers, etc., etc. And that's basically our DNA making sure that our body is running effectively and running efficiently, right? Now, the thing about Charlie, and this is really important, is that Charlie does absolutely everything by the book. And when I say book, that's effectively our DNA. In the analogy, it's this massive stack of operating manuals. And anytime Charlie is in a new situation or set of circumstances, he flips through the book and looks for the entry in terms of what he's supposed to do based on those circumstances. Now, the challenge is that Charlie depends completely on the book. So if there's no entry in the book, he won't know what to do. And this links back to all those changes we've made to our lifestyle, because we're throwing a bunch of stuff at Charlie that he's never seen before, and there's no entry in the book. Or if there is an entry, it no longer correctly applies to the new circumstances. So he'll still do what the book tells him, but in this case, it actually ends up not being so good for our health and for our vitality. Now, perhaps the most common example used to explain this is that of lactose intolerance. So let's quickly talk through that. To successfully consume and digest milk, our bodies need to break down the sugar lactose. And that's no problem. Charlie has an enzyme called lactase. It basically snips the sugar in half, and our bodies can really easily digest it after that happens. Now, the issue is we only drank dairy as babies, throughout our entire evolutionary history. And by the time we were kids and into adulthood, there was no dairy in our diet, right? So what does Charlie do? He decommissions the enzyme. Why continue to produce something we don't need? Okay, so just get rid of it. Now, rewind the clock 10,000 years, agricultural revolution, we start to introduce dairy into our diet over the course of our entire life. That's a problem. There's no enzyme to break down the lactose. And that's what lactose intolerance is. We can't break it down. It sits in our gut. The bacteria in our gut, they end up breaking it down, and that leads to the gases and the bloating and the other problems associated with lactose intolerance. But wait a minute, some people aren't, right? Well, there was a mutation that spread through some populations, particularly those that depended heavily on dairy as part of their calories. And that mutation basically is a mutation in which our bodies continue to produce the enzyme into adulthood. So no lactose intolerance. About 1/3 of the global population has that mutation, myself included, luckily, and about 2/3 don't, and those 2/3 will still suffer from some degree of lactose intolerance. So that's lactose intolerance. And I mean, that's an example from 10,000 years ago, but I mean, that's a small change compared to what we've done over the last 150 to 200 years. And now we've got poor Charlie. I mean, he's flipping through his book. He's got no idea what's going on. There's either no entry, or the entry he does have no longer applies to the new circumstances. And then he does it, but it ends up having a negative impact on our health and our vitality. Okay, so that pretty much steps us through the second foundational pillar. Amazing piece of machinery, embedded with this awesome intrinsic intelligence, but not very flexible for dealing with changes. And by the way, we've changed just about everything over the last 150 to 200 years. And so not surprisingly, a big thing or a big part of the Revival Health platform is what changes can we make to our modern routine to provide Charlie with the conditions that he's used to and for which there are entries in his operating manual. Okay, that's it. I hope you found this interesting. Lots more to come in the upcoming videos. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.